Hi, everyone, and welcome to this LSE online event on artificial intelligence and democracy, which is part of the Forum for Philosophy conference series. My name is Thomas Ferretti, and I teach philosophy and business ethics here at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Today, I've invited a panel of experts to talk about their research on the impact of artificial intelligence on democratic norms. So defining artificial intelligence is not an easy task, but for the sake of our discussion today, I adopt a simple definition presented by Yezen Gabriel, who is an AI ethicist at DeepMind, Google's AI company. So intelligence can refer to an agent's ability to achieve a variety of goals in a wide range of environments. And when this ability is attributed to computer systems and models, we can talk about artificial intelligence. And machine learning in particular refers to a family of statistical and algorithmic approaches used to train a model so that it can perform intelligent actions. A famous example of the capabilities of machine learning algorithms is DeepMind's program AlphaGo, who managed to learn how to play Go by itself and to defeat Lee Sedol in 2015, the best human player of Go. Today, public administrations increasingly use AI to automatize the allocation of social benefits. Judges sometimes experiment with using risk assessment algorithms to determine a person's eligibility for bail or parole. And social media platforms use AI to optimize content moderation, while political actors can use these platforms to engage in micro-targeting and misinformation. So this raises a number of philosophical questions. What legitimacy do governments or businesses have in selecting principles of AI governance? Are black box algorithms threatening our capacity to exercise scrutiny over the decisions of public institutions? And how can we align AI systems with democratic values, such as fairness or free speech? The answers to these questions may depend on why we value democracy. So there may be an intrinsic value in having the ability to govern ourselves as free and equal citizens through collective self-determination. But others point at the instrumental value of democratic institutions. So prudentially, perhaps, democratic checks and balances can help prevent abuses of power. And epistemically, under the right conditions at least, democratic deliberation can improve the quality of public decisions by improving the information we have about our citizens and the responsiveness of public institutions to citizens' preferences. So I'm very excited to be joined in this conversation on AI and democracy by four experts, Professor Jocelyn Maclure, Zeynep Pamuk, Annette Zimmermann, and Etienne Brown. I will introduce them shortly when we start our discussions. And I'm really happy to have them today because I've been reading their research. I mean, they're working at the cutting edge of the research in AI ethics, and I've been reading their research and using it in my own teaching. So it's a very nice opportunity to discuss their ideas and to ask them some questions that I've been willing to ask them for a long time. So because of the impact of AI on democracy is very large, I propose today to ask our experts just a few questions on key ideas in their most recent research to introduce our audience to some of the burning debates happening right now in the field of AI ethics. There will be also a chance for you, the audience, to ask questions. I invite you to share your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. The instructions for how to use this are in the chat. And please let us know your name and affiliation. We are particularly keen to hear from our students and alumni at the LSE, but everyone, of course, is welcome to ask questions. I will select at the end some of your questions to ask our panelists, and this will lead us towards the end of the event around 7:15 p.m. You can also tweet about this event using the hashtag LSE post-COVID. And finally, this event is being recorded in the hope that a podcast can be made afterwards, assuming that we do not face any technical difficulties. So without further ado, I would like to start with you, Jocelyn, Jocelyn Maclure, to discuss the importance of publicity in democratic decisions. Jocelyn, you are a professor of philosophy at McGill University in Canada. You have done a lot of research in political philosophy, including a book on secularism and freedom of conscience with Professor Charles Taylor. And your recent research has turned to artificial intelligence. And today I would like to discuss your recent paper entitled AI, Explainability and Public Reason. And to introduce a little bit the general context, one common condition for public decisions or governmental decision to be considered legitimate is that they must be open to public scrutiny. But the use of machine learning in social technical systems raises problems for this ideal of publicity. So can you briefly introduce the explainability problem in machine learning?
Sure. First, let me thank you, Thomas, for organizing such a great panel. I'm very looking forward to the discussion with you and Zeynep and Annette and Etienne. Current state-of-the-art AI system have an explainability problem. Perhaps actually two explainability problems, but it's both are based on the way that they function, right? So it's the most efficient AI systems nowadays are based on different kinds of machine learning algorithms or different kinds of artificial neural networks. And such models are said to be opaque because when they produce a given output, it can be how something is classified, it can be a prediction, it can be any kind of decisions or recommendations. The given output cannot be easily explained. So the AI can make a recommendation about a particular medical diagnosis, or it can classify someone who was found guilty of a crime as someone who presents a high risk of recidivism, or it can predict that a candidate for a particular job will not stay long on the job, that she or he will resign soon, or that a candidate who wants to get into a particular academic program, that he will not be able to obtain the degree in the planned amount of time. So all these outputs, which have important effects on the persons who has submitted to the automated decision, the output cannot be easily explained. So even if you look at the code, you look at the algorithm, you look at the code, you cannot easily extract an explanation for the given output. So that's the briefly put the explainability problem. In the history of AI, when so-called classical AI or rule-based AI or expert systems were the best available models, AI did not face the same an explainability problem, right? Because you could look at the code and you could kind of find a logical pathway from the input to the output, or a chain of reasons, right, leading to a particular decision. But when you, given that machine learning algorithms are much more powerful, much more efficient, say tasks such as computer vision or natural language processing, these models outperform the more classical kinds of AI algorithms, but they are more efficient, but they are also opaque. And it's mostly because their internal architecture is highly complex, right? In their training phase, they require a very large amount of data. and their internal architecture involves, kind of a neural network, or artificial neural network, which is often made of a very, very large amount of so-called hidden layers, and all the layers themselves contain many nodes or nodes or weight, it's the performance is based on the capacity of the model to find patterns in these large amounts of data. So it's a very powerful tools. But again, if you so to speak, lift the hood and look at the algorithms, you will not find something like a causal chain which leads to an explanation. So I said that there are maybe two explainability problems. Sometimes the programmers themselves cannot fully explain why the model is performing well because of that tremendous internal complexity. And there's a lot of trial and error and fine tuning, and there are so many parameters that are involved. So of course, the computer scientists can tell you, well, this is a reinforcement learning algorithm and this is how it works and so on. But why does that particular algorithm perform so well? It might be difficult sometimes to explain exactly why. So that's the explainability problem as a techno-scientific problem, right? And it's not necessarily that like ethically salient. It can be, but not necessarily. In my work, I focus on the other explainability problem, which is a normative problem, right? When we use AI to automate decision making in ethically high-stake situations, well, then it means that the AI will make a decision which has an important impact on an individual or on a group, but we will not have an easy access to the reasons which led to the decision, and that could be used to assess the justification of the decision. So that's explainability as an ethical problem, and I think that's one of the most important ethical problems that AI is facing nowadays.
And in particular, you believe that this opacity and this explainability problem leads to a deficit in public reason. And so can you explain a little bit why public reason matters for democracy, what it is first, and perhaps why it matters for democracy?
Right, okay. So public reason is a concept in mostly political philosophy that is drawn from Kantian philosophy. Kant, as an Enlightenment philosopher, promoted the public use of reasons, right? So we enlightened citizens should try to engage in reason giving with other citizens and public officials as well. And the goal is to try to provide rational justification for our beliefs, for our actions, and for our public decisions as well. So it's a theme that was taken up later by Kantian, post-Kantian philosophers, and in the 20th century by philosophers like Habermas or Rawls or Honora O'Neill. And so I draw mostly on Rawls, and his notion of public reason has two main dimensions. The first one is more procedural. So public reason for him is the reason of democratic citizens and elected officials, engage in public deliberation. So it's the reason of citizen, and again, it's through exchanging reasons with others that we should hope to make public decisions that will be just for all the citizens. But it also has a substantive dimension. So public reason for Rawls are public reasons in the plural, right? So what are the substantial justification that we use to justify decisions, especially high-stake decisions, right? When our basic rights are at play, or our basic welfare, security, and so on, we should aim to publicly justify our decisions. And public justifications requires providing to all those who are affected by decisions reasons that are public in the sense that they the affected parties could at least potentially accept them, right? So that the reasons are not private in the sense that they are the reasons of the religious majority, for instance, or they are the reasons of the elite or the most wealthy. There are reasons, they are public in the sense that there are reasons that all could share, regardless of the, to which social groups they belong to, and so on. So that is seen as a condition of the democratic legitimacy of basic public norms and decisions, that they are public in that sense. And in that sense, I think it's both the conditions of democratic legitimacy and also of justice, understood as fairness, that all citizens could potentially at least accept them because they are not biased against them, or they don't favor the interest of a particular group.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think in your paper, you draw an interesting distinction. So clearly, if we use opaque algorithms on Netflix to make recommendations for videos, maybe the opacity is not such a problem. If it works and it makes good recommendations, why should we know exactly how it works? But clearly, for high stakes cases like the allocation of public services or the automation of decisions in courts of justice, in these cases, it seems that there's a higher standard of justification. We need to be able to, or the public needs to be able to understand what is the reasoning that led to a particular decision, to be able to evaluate it perhaps, or even perhaps contest it. And so exactly. I think that's an interesting distinction.
Right, exactly. So for some reasons, it seems like the algorithm that Amazon uses think that I will be very interested in Jordan Peterson's work. And I hope that's not because that the algorithm discovered something, that I doesn't even recognize, that I fail when I introspect, and that somehow I'm attracted to his work. I'm pretty sure that I'm not, interested in Jordan Peterson's work, but the algorithm keeps recommending his books to me. But that's not a high stake situation, right? It's just sometimes Spotify gets it wrong, and that's all. It doesn't affect my profoundly my well-being or my basic rights for sure. But in other cases, if I'm applying for a job and the company is using an algorithm at least to decide who will be shortlisted, well then it matters greatly to my right to equal opportunity, that the algorithm will not be biased against me because of some of my characteristics or things that distinguish me from other candidates. And in these high-stake scenarios, the normative position that I'm defending is that we should recognize that organizations, both public and private, should abide by a strong explainability requirement, because the basic rights and well-being of the affected parties are involved. So these are ethically high-stake situations.
And so if we have this ideal of kind of public justification for our AI systems, some propose a kind of technical solution, so an explainable AI system that will be able to explain their decisions to human beings. But you propose also, in addition, perhaps, or as a complement, a social and institutional approach to the explainability problem. So can you elaborate a little bit on this idea?
Sure. I'm a philosopher, and I do my best to understand how AI works today by reading and discussing with AI researchers, but I don't claim any technical expertise there. So I'm well aware that explainable AI is it's a booming field of research now, and I remain agnostic about how successful it will prove to be. There are some researchers who want to make the AI algorithms intrinsically more transparent. Right. So I don't know if this involves that we will need to move away from machine learning and try to design other kind of algorithms that would have the same kind of performance. And I don't know if that will be successful. Others are trying to design algorithms that will be interpretive algorithms, so ex post, they will say, so this is what a deep neural network, provide us with these outcomes, and we'll use another algorithm to shed some light on the output, to provide some explainability. And I think that philosophers, at least like me, I'm not a philosopher of computer science, for instance. I'm agnostic. I don't know if that will be successful and good. It's going to be just good if it does. But in the meantime, organizations, both public and private, are deploying AI in these high-stake situations already. So as ethicists and political philosophers, but also regulators, need to decide how we should regulate the use of these AI system. And it dawned on me that often the research comes from the AI researchers or other actors in the tech world, and they're not expert in how on human nature and how societies works and so on. And often I think that they underestimate how we can also come up with social and institutional answers to these ethical dilemmas. And one of the arguments or counter arguments to the strong explainability requirement that I addressed in the paper is what I call the argument from the limitation or the flaws of the human mind, right? So often AI enthusiasts will say, well, look at human reasoning, how flawed and biased it is. And it's true that it is, right? We're all fallible epistemic agents. But because we know that we're fallible, we designed many of our procedures and institutions precisely to mitigate these shortcomings and flaws. And we can give different examples in the judicial system, or in how in the scientific community, or even bureaucratic decision making. Oftentimes we will find some very, like, the formalism will be extremely rigid, precisely because we want to mitigate for these shortcomings. So in many cases, we'll try to make the decision-making process more intersubjective, right? So to compensate for any individual own biases. So you need to exchange reason with others, and there's some checks and balances and so on. And sometimes we design rules, and I'll conclude with that because I don't want to take too much time, but we, as many of you, I was struck by the result of that study showing that judges tend to be more, say, severe in their decision right before lunch, right? It was very striking and worrisome, right? Because that's just noise, right? It's not ethically relevant that the judge is hungry. I participated recently in a trial as an expert witness, and I was really struck by the formalism of the procedure, right? And including what looks like very trivial rule about when we should go to recess, and so that the judge can rest. There's a very strict compliance with these rules, just to make sure that we try to mitigate the risk that noise and other arbitrary factors will have an impact on decision making. So that's just a small example showing that social and institutional rules are precisely designed to compensate for our individual shortcomings. And it seems that we underestimate the importance of the design of our social institution when we think about the limits of human reasoning. So it doesn't strike me as a very good argument to try to deflate this explainability requirement, right? If we're going to automate some decision making in some crucial areas of human life, well, the standard should be very high. The rules should be strict, and alluding to the shortcomings of individual region doesn't seem like a good reason to be lenient with regard to those who decide to use AI in these crucial areas.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting, and I think it makes a nice transition to the next part of our discussion, because I think in this institutional approach to the explainability problem, It's also something that can help us to distinguish two different kinds of ideals. The ideal of publicity, which is the idea that public decisions, for example, should be at least potentially subjected to public scrutiny with the adequate institutional safeguards. And the ideal of transparency, which is simply to kind of open the whole process to everyone, for everyone to see. And so I want to ask a question to the audience. Try to get the audience a little bit involved. And I'll ask you the following question, but first I'll set up the question. So there's been concerns growing recently regarding social media platforms using opaque algorithms in content moderation to suppress or amplify speech online. And in a recent article on this topic by Chris Stoker-Walker in the MIT Technology Review, he reports that the chief executive of Ofcom, Melanie Dawes, which regulates social media in the UK, has said that social media platforms will have to explain how their code works. And their goal is to bring transparency and oversight of the algorithms that govern our timelines and our news feeds. And the publicity requirement would merely require institutional safeguards to be able to exercise scrutiny over social media platforms and how they engage in content moderation. So a typical example in a different context, a restaurant may not want to be totally transparent about the ingredients in their secret sauce because they fear competition, but they have to give their recipe to the food inspectors in charge of public health. So this is an institutional solution allowing public scrutiny, but without total transparency, right? And so similarly with social media platforms, we might need regulation to impose publicity and oversight guarantees. But to protect platforms' trade secrets and user privacy, maybe, we might want to avoid total transparency and prefer instead some kind of independent third-party inspector looking under the hood. Right? So that's a kind of example of how to apply the publicity requirement in the case of social media platforms, content moderation. The transparency requirement, by contrast, would be a bit more demanding. Right? So recently in the news, we've all heard that Elon Musk initiated the very eventful process of buying Twitter. And one of his main motivations was reportedly to make its algorithm totally transparent and open source so that everyone could exercise scrutiny over it. And he argued that because Twitter had become the kind of de facto public space, transparency is necessary to restore trust and make sure that the algorithm is not politically biased. For example, censoring conservative speech and amplifying liberal speech, or the reverse. And he believes that total transparency, or just making the algorithm open source, is important to preserve trust and democracy. But besides questioning the practicality and the real benefits of such measure, some also underline that open sourcing Twitter's algorithms would make the entire code base of the website accessible to all, which would potentially allow bad actors to pore over the software and find vulnerabilities to exploit. So there are clearly problems with this. And so if you think of these kind of two approaches, publicity and transparency, so where is the audience regarding content moderation on social media? Do you believe that publicity guarantees are sufficient, or do you support total transparency? So you can answer the poll right away, and we'll see the results very shortly. So we should get the results So I think everyone can see the results now. Interestingly, a majority, a kind of significant majority of people support total transparency, which I think is a very interesting result. A little over 35% support publicity guarantees instead. So this is an ongoing debate, and it's the kind of debate that results from these kinds of distinctions that we've just discussed between the ideals of publicity and transparency. So I want to turn now to Zeynep Pamuk to discuss the role of AI and science in democracy. So Zeynep, you are assistant professor of political science at the University of California, San Diego, and your research interests are in political theory and the philosophy of science. In your book, Politics and Expertise, How to Use Science in a Democratic Society, you write that our ability to act on some of the most pressing issues of our time, such as pandemics and climate change and even artificial intelligence, depends on knowledge provided by scientists or other experts. And this reliance on expert knowledge sometimes raises a backlash against technocracy, right, the rule by experts, which would undermine democratic legitimacy. And a similar discussion arises in the context of algorithmic decision-making, with a recent backlash against algorithmic governance, the rule by algorithms. So to begin, can you briefly introduce the usual dichotomy between technocracy and populism?
Sure. First, I want to start by thanking you, Thomas, for bringing us together and for this great conversation, and thanking our audience for tuning in. So the technocracy and populism are, on the face of it, quite different modes of governance. Technocracy involves rule by experts according to rational methods of calculation and prediction. It relies on reason as its main authority of political decision-making. Populism, by contrast, usually involves a leader who purports to speak for the people in its totality, or to represent the people as one whole, and ignores pluralism, difference, contestation. But I think an interesting way to think of these two seemingly quite different modes of politics is to see them both as inversions or degradations of the institutions and structure of representative democracy, and instead putting in its place a different understanding of representation. So in technocracy, the idea is that reason and rational speculation by experts can replace the contestation between different parties, different interests, and instead it replaces truth and truth-seeking mechanisms with political representation. And similarly, in populism, the idea is that one leader, one charismatic leader can speak for the whole. So once again, the political process that involves compromise, bargaining, conflict, negotiation, deliberation, these kinds of processes is eliminated, and instead you have one person who speaks for some imagined wholeness of the people. So in a way, both are reactions to the perceived limitations or failures, backlash to the problems with the institutions of parliamentary representative democracy. There have been a lot of research. There's increasing research on how or whether AI and automation in the economy more broadly is resulting in a populist backlash. I'm interested more in the other horn of the dilemma, the relationship between AI and technocracy.
And so do you believe that algorithms exacerbate or mitigate technocratic tendencies in democracies?
Good question. So once again, on the surface, when we think about what AI decision-making is replacing, we see that it's replacing various forms of traditional experts, right? So, for example, it's replacing judges, it's replacing bureaucrats, if we're thinking about the use of AI in welfare decisions, for example. In the financial sector, it's replacing financial experts, maybe it's replacing bankers. So insofar as our concern with technocracy is a concern about ordinary citizens being subject to the will of experts, to the arbitrary decision-making power of experts, or as Weber puts it, to bureaucratic domination, then we might think there's some reason to think that AI decision-making actually changes the problem, maybe takes away power from the traditional experts, and at least gives it to an algorithm. But that would be too quick, because AI also relies on a host of invisible expert work. So we see a new class of experts, not the old experts and judges perhaps, but a host of engineers, coders, software designers who are taking the place of these experts. So they're coding the decision rules, they're writing the models, and they are doing the really crucial work, and their decisions can likewise be subject to charges of arbitrariness. So just as we were thinking that maybe this mitigates some technocratic tendencies, we see the problem crop up again. But I think on a deeper level, there's a more interesting way of thinking about AI and technocracy, which is about how AI itself, the reliance on machine intelligence for decision-making itself, embodies a very technocratic mode of decision-making. That reliance on AI to make decisions itself is a very technocratic mode of reasoning, setting aside the expert or the people involved. And this, I think, so in some areas that we all agreed required calculation and prediction, which is where most of the AI decision-making started, I think there we can just think of it as a replacement issue. But as long as AI appears to perform successfully and takes over other areas where decision-making traditionally relied on different modes of reasoning, perhaps less precise, less mathematical, less formal, but more human, more inexact, involving compromises, maybe less accurate, but a different mode of more political decision-making. If AI expands into those areas, then we will see an expansion of a technocratic mode of decision-making in areas where it didn't exist before. And finally, of course, there's a lot of talk about ethics in the context of AI, as many of us are concerned about the role of human values, of ethical and political values, of fairness, of accountability in the AI domain. There's a lot of talk about these. But when we think about operationalizing fairness in AI decision-making, often what it comes down to, and I'm not saying, philosophers are doing also a lot of work on structural and institutional approaches, but one thing that it comes down to is to express fairness mathematically and to code it into the AI algorithm. And that has to be a technocrat's dream of what a deeply contested, essentially contested notion as fairness can be expressed as, right? You tell me, philosophers tell me what it is, which understanding of fairness is the right one, and we'll just code it into the algorithm. And this way of thinking about something as contested and as political as fairness is what's the right thing to do, what a good way to make decisions is, that is really, that has to be a technocrat's dream of turning ethics into expert or machine decision-making. So that's another cause of concern.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we'll come back to the ambiguities of defining what fairness and machine fairness is when we discuss with Annette. But I think clearly one response that we might hear sometimes is that expertise is good, that it's good to rely on experts to make public decisions because expertise or science is certain, is objective, or it's value-free, right? And so it would avoid the kind of political conflicts that we constantly see in our democracies. But you challenge this conventional account of expertise in your research by questioning whether science and especially human experts can really be objective or value-free. And so this translates into the question of algorithmic governance, because some might think that contrary to experts, algorithms perhaps might be more objective or value-free because they're just kind of mathematical models. And so do you believe that this is the case, or do you think that algorithms might also face the same kind of problems that experts do?
I think algorithms very much face the same kinds of problems about the role of values and subjective aspects in the model and the decision-making process. So actually the literature on values in science, which I draw on heavily in my book, and which was spearheaded by feminist philosophers of science, is really directly relevant to understanding AI decision-making. So we can think of different stages of the process, from the data to the modeling to various choices about goals. And at each stage, you'll find values involved. So to start with the data, I don't know how much Annette is going to go into these, so I don't want to take over. I know she's going to talk about injustice and AI, but quickly, the data we have is usually colored with past injustices, and collection of statistics by the state has been the product of various unjust mechanisms. So statistics themselves are laden with the values of those who have collected it for certain purposes, which usually involve marginalizing certain groups. At the stage of writing the stage of choosing the goal for which you want the AI algorithm to optimize, you have to make a decision about how to express that goal. So let's say you want AI for hiring or something. So you have to have an output that you want to optimize, something like candidate quality. I don't know if people here have been involved in hiring, but in my department, for example, we deliberated for a long time about whether we should have a rubric for hiring candidates, and it's just so subjective. It creates the illusion of formalization, of mathematization, where like different aspects would have numbers attached to them. But when you think about it, it's the most subjective process. And of course, to have the AI do the CV filtering for you, you have to go through something like this and have an output that the AI is then optimizing very effectively for. And that couldn't be more subjective. You're taking a lot of very contested things, and you come up with a quantification for something that's probably deeply qualitative and should not be quantified often. Another thing is about the choice of parameters, of constraints. So the modelers have to make various trade-offs about what sorts of processes they should represent accurately, and which ones they can approximate more, what's more important to represent properly. And in each of these choices, there's a trade-off between different kinds of errors. So you will have different kinds of mistakes depending on how you make these choices. So this is the inductive risk literature in the philosophy of science. And these choices are very subjective, and they will produce different results. So I'm not saying the result is arbitrariness or inaccuracy. I mean, that's a little bit of both is a given, but there are subjective trade-offs that the designer or the coder has to make. And finally, this issue about fairness and its coding. Of course, there are very different conceptions of fairness that you could code into the algorithm. And it's been shown that many of them are mutually incompatible. So whether you have more accuracy for different groups, or whether you have equal rates of false positives, equal rates of false negatives, these are subjective decisions. Somebody has to decide which conception of fairness to use. And this is another place where values go directly into the coding. So no, I do not think AI reduces the role of values. Maybe it hides it better, I don't know. But I think the same issues that arise in science arise in the domain of AI.
And in your book, you argue for institutions that support scientific dissent, right? Such as an adversarial science court to facilitate public scrutiny over science. And do you think that there will be a role for such institutions in the governance of AI?
Yes, absolutely. So I think one important thing is that all this criticism of AI, debates about its ethic, its politics, should not end with just principles that we come up with that we hope the designers and users will simply implement. I think it's important to move from just criticism and design recommendations to more control, either by the government, ideally by citizens themselves. And the idea of a science court is to bring together scientists and experts directly, face to face, on an issue that involves high technical content, which is very much something that fits the description of AI, where citizens would ordinarily be left out and also maybe find it difficult to evaluate between different arguments. And the adversarial structure is meant to bring together, to bring out the values involved, the weaknesses of different views, the implications. So different experts would criticize one another, cross-examine one another. So the question in the AI case is exactly what level this would be pitched at. So would you have a higher level debate about policy? I think that would be one way to go. The Science Court is meant to be an institution that feeds into policy decisions or makes policy decisions. So that's one way. But another I can imagine is to take a dispute about a more micro level design principle and have different experts defending a different view on it. Or maybe we could have something like what we just asked our audience members about whether we want publicity or whether we want complete transparency. So something like that, and there'd be different sides arguing for a different side of the issue. And I absolutely think direct participation by citizens could play an important role in the governance of AI.
Well, thanks. That's really fascinating. It also links with the discussion of how to build institutions to help exercise public scrutiny over algorithmic governance. And now I want to turn to Annette Zimmermann to discuss issues at the intersection of democracy and algorithmic injustice. We're a bit behind schedule, but we'll try to really discuss all these complex issues in sufficient detail. So Annette is a lecturer of philosophy at the University of York and incoming assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In a recent paper entitled Proceed with Caution, you underline that it is becoming more common, and we've discussed this a little bit earlier, that the decision makers in private and public institutions are predictive algorithmic systems, not humans. And for you, relying on algorithmic systems is procedurally unjust in societies where there is already some background of structural injustice. And interestingly, I think in your research, you also argue that solving algorithmic injustice is not just a technical problem for software developers. It really requires a kind of robust democratic participation, as we just discussed with Zeynep. And so we need some democratic oversight, not just from developers, but from all members of society. And so now I want to focus really on the question of fairness. And so to begin, could you perhaps briefly introduce the problem of algorithmic injustice in general, and perhaps explain quickly what is a statistical bias in algorithmic injustice?
Right. Let me begin by thanking you as well, Thomas, for putting together this event. Thanks to LSE for hosting it. And thank you to the audience for participating and discussing with us. Now, in terms of defining algorithmic injustice, there's this really common view, both in computer science and also other disciplines that intersect with this kind of interdisciplinary research field. A lot of people seem to think that AI, or just big data more broadly, is simply a social mirror. So the idea is, well, don't blame AI if we get really biased outcomes. So if we get outcomes that kind of amplify things like gender inequality or racial inequality, because guess what? Society is already deeply unjust. So it's to be expected that our technological systems will reflect that to some degree. So it's kind of tempting to think of AI as just a kind of perfect mirror image of the way society currently is. What's missing in that conception is that AI can actually often exacerbate conditions of structural injustice and also other kinds of injustice, particularly if we leave it unchecked. Right? So what we see very often is that human agents who are involved in deliberations about AI design and deployment, so that could be programmers, but it could also be people who make decisions about procuring particular tools, for instance, in order to deploy them in our governmental institutions, and other kind of policy level decision makers. They're really prone to opting out of this kind of process of critical scrutiny over AI. Right? So we see phenomena like automation bias. We know that human agents are really unlikely to question a decision sequence if it seemingly results from this really quantifiable process. So we as human agents just kind of overtrust those types of decisions. And so it's very hard to get ourselves to intervene upon those decisions, but that's exactly where we must intervene if we want to avoid this exacerbation effect. So if we leave a particular algorithmic decision-making tool, run its course, we can often see that phenomena like statistical bias can get exacerbated over time. Now, you also asked about statistical bias specifically, so let's unpack that just with a really famous example. So a lot of computer scientists and philosophers are interested in this particular example of a criminal recidivism risk prediction algorithm. And that algorithm is called COMPAS. Now, what people found out about COMPAS, and just one group of people to mention in particular here is a group of investigative journalists at the ProPublica platform. They conducted a really, influential investigation here that really kicked off a lot of public interest in this topic as well. They found out that different people fared really differently when being assessed by this COMPAS algorithm. And in particular, COMPAS failed differently for different groups of people. So just to give you a very concrete example, there were these two defendants who were being scored by COMPAS. One of them, a Black defendant, Bernard Parker, had only one minor prior offense, which was a nonviolent resistance to arrest. The other, a white defendant, Dylan Fugate, had multiple, armed robberies and kind of drug-related offenses. And so over the course of the next few years, Bernard Parker, the Black defendant, never reoffended again. But Dylan Fugate did reoffend multiple times, again, multiple drug charges. Interestingly, though, COMPAS gave Bernard Parker a 10 out of 10 risk score. So COMPAS viewed this particular defendant as a very high-risk individual, whereas Dylan Fugate got only 3 out of 10, so pretty low risk score. And so that gives you a pretty concrete illustration of how the system can go wrong in different directions. So it really overestimated Bernard Parker's riskiness in terms of recidivism rate. And it really underestimated Dylan Fugate's risk level. And so that tracks statistical distributions that we already see in society, so particular injustices that are particularly salient in the criminal justice system, where Black defendants are systematically treated unjustly. They're now being replicated by the use of this ostensibly neutral technology. But interestingly, again, the company that developed this tool, which at the time was called Northpoint and is now called Equivent, they were trying to defend themselves here, obviously, right? So they were saying, well, listen, our tool just relies on data that shows the world as it currently is. Recall that's the data as a social mirror thesis from before. Computer scientists actually have a concept for that. That concept is called calibration. And it's a reasonable goal in a design process, right? So we want to make sure that the systems that we design actually adequately reflect the data that we have. Problem is that data has been shaped by injustice, right? So it's not like we're starting out on an equal playing field. We can see that when we think about how to even measure things like crime rates, right? So effectively, we don't have a good method for measuring crime. What we can measure, of course, is arrest rates. And arrest rates, again, are influenced by important and pernicious social factors. We know that particular communities, especially communities of color, are dramatically over-policed, particularly in the US context, which leads to higher arrest rates, right? So the arrest rate itself is not a decisively informative measurement. But of course, if we don't reflect on the informativeness of this particular data point, we're just going to accept the claim that our database shows us a really high distribution of crime rates in one particular population. And so that's when we as human agents can really be misled when we try to make decisions based on algorithmic scores.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the examples you mentioned are very illuminating. And so clearly there is just a rough statistical bias. So if the data we have is biased in some way, for example, because the people who are collecting the data or the method we use to collect the data is problematic, that can lead to biases in algorithmic decisions. There could also be unintended biases. So even if we remove specific identifying information about gender or race, for example, the point of AI systems and machine learning in particular is to kind of find patterns in the data. So they're able to kind of approximate, use proxies for gender or race. But in your research, you also explained that even accurate algorithms that would actually be good at representing society or at identifying particular characteristics of individuals. So even accurate algorithms would be unjust or could lead to reproducing injustices if they are used in structurally unjust society. So can you explain this a little bit further?
Sure, yeah. Let me give you my favorite contemporary example of a supposedly accurate tool that still leads to morally and politically objectionable outcomes, at least to some degree. So there was this Stanford-based research team that recently published a tool, which was a recognition tool, and they claimed that their tool can recognize people's sexual orientation.
I think we just have lost Annette. And so maybe if Annette doesn't reconnect, I'll just say a few words and then we'll jump directly to Etienne. And so I think what Annette was trying to explain here is that if you live in a society that involves structural injustices, then some marginalized groups in a population do have statistically lower prospects, right? And so because of past injustices, because of current injustices, people in marginalized communities might have less access to education, might have less chances of landing a good job. And so even an algorithm that would be very accurate, that would be very good at making predictions about individuals and wouldn't involve statistical bias or the kind of biases, might still become extremely accurate at excluding people who do have statistically lower prospects, right? Even if someone is part of a group that has statistically lower prospects, but they themselves don't because they had access to some privileges. And so in these cases, we reduce individuals to statistics about the group to which they belong, and that could be a source of injustice as well. Now, I want to turn to Etienne Brown. We'll discuss disinformation. Etienne is assistant professor of philosophy at San Jose State University in the US. You have a variety of interests in ethics and the philosophy of technology, but today we will discuss your article on free speech and the legal prohibition of fake news. So if we believe in the epistemic value of democracy, which I mentioned earlier, we could wonder about the effects of social media platforms on democratic deliberation. Welcome back, Annette. I'm sorry that we lost you.
Talk about algorithmic injustice and you get kicked off the Zoom call immediately.
Yes, there must be some plot or something. I'll finish with Etienne, and then perhaps in the discussion we can come back to questions about injustice. As I was saying, so if we believe in the epistemic value of democracy, we could wonder about the effects of social media platforms on democratic deliberation. Artificial intelligence increases the capacity of these social media platforms to govern information flow, right? So to govern what we see on our newsfeed through algorithmic content moderation. And they can do so in ways that enhances or undermines the quality of the information that we receive. And this is important because many people rely on information they get from social media to inform their political beliefs or make political decisions. For instance, when Facebook decided to ban the publication of news articles on its platform in Australia, it was revealed that up to 40% of Australians get most of their news from Facebook. And so if social media platforms fail to adequately suppress fake news and disinformation, or even amplify it to stimulate engagement, then it could undermine individuals' autonomy and their capacity to engage in meaningful collective self-determination. So Etienne, perhaps if you can begin by briefly explaining how social media platforms use algorithmic content moderation and how this allows the proliferation of fake news.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas, for the invitation, and thanks to everyone, panelists and audience members who were able to join this Zoom. It's always a pleasure to discuss. I'm very happy to have the discussion. I'll try to keep my answers not quite short, and then maybe we can have time to go back to what Annette was saying, because I know she was caught off. I'm certainly interested in learning more about what she thinks about algorithmic injustice. So yeah, the short answer to your question, Thomas, is pretty straightforward, right? What you see on social media is to a large extent determined by algorithmic recommendation systems. So social media companies collect data about your online behavior, and they use this data to present you with posts and advertisements that they think will interest you. For instance, if you've been Googling new shoes a lot recently, then you might see an ad on Facebook about a kind of shoe that you can buy. And of course, if you've been liking certain kinds of posts on social media like Twitter, on Facebook, then you'll be presented with similar posts, right? Of course, the information, the kind of post that people engage with on social media is the kind of information is not necessarily or always information of high quality. So if you engage with conspiracy theories a lot, then you will be presented with more conspiracy theories. And if you engage with fake news a lot, you will be presented with more fake news. So I think that in this way, algorithmic recommendation system can kind of contribute to the proliferation of disinformation online. You're also likely as an internet user, social media user, to see opinions with which you already agree, because when people post ideas or claims that you agree with, you're more likely to like them or to engage with them, which can lead to the formation of epistemic bubbles, which is basically a situation in which you're repeatedly exposed to ideas with which you already agree, but you're not or rarely exposed to the views or claims made by people that are kind of outside your epistemic community, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in your recent paper, you argue that democratic governments and perhaps social media platforms themselves have strong reasons to prohibit fake news, and that doing so is compatible with free speech. So can you elaborate a little bit on your position?
Yes, certainly. So this is the controversial claim of the article, right? So I don't believe that necessarily prohibiting fake news legally is kind of a miracle cure that's going to solve the problem of disinformation in the internet. That's not what I'm arguing, but I am arguing that governmental regulation against misinformation, certain kinds of them, are compatible with free speech. So basically, the central concept in my argument is the concept of autonomy, which is an extremely important concept for the philosophy of free speech. So there's a long-standing tendency, especially in the American philosophical tradition, American legal tradition, to consider that no matter what kind of speech you're exposed to, online or offline, for instance, hate speech or misinformation, no matter what speech you're exposed to, you're the only person responsible for your actions. Because fundamentally, you're an autonomous agent, right? So regardless of the speech that you're presented with, you make the autonomous decision to act. And philosophers who endorse this conception of autonomy tend to think that if we regulate speech, we disrespect people as autonomous agents. We kind of infantilize them. And we act in a paternalistic manner. So I think that this kind of conception of autonomy and the relationship between free speech and autonomy is a little bit of an oversimplification. I think that people who diffuse speech are partly responsible for actions that other people commit on the basis of that speech. I don't think that with concept like responsibility need to be the case that 100% of the responsibility falls on the shoulders of the person who acts. I think we can have a more kind of distributed conception of responsibility. And even more importantly, I believe that I think we should endorse a kind of different and a richer conception of autonomy. I've been influenced by the feminist discourse on autonomy that developed in the 90s during the debate on the relationship between pornography and gender justice. So in my view, being autonomous is essentially a matter of effectively pursuing your goals, of being able to do the things that you really want to do. And I think that misinformation can pose an obstacle to that, especially when misinformation prevents people from appreciating reasons for action. So all of this is a little bit abstract. Let me give you an example of that. I think it's fair to say that most parents in the world have the goal, the objective of protecting the health of their children, but they might have encountered misinformation, health misinformation, for instance, misinformation about vaccines that led them to believe that vaccines are dangerous and they should not have their children vaccinated against, COVID or another disease. And I think that in this case, what happens is that misinformation prevents parents to appreciate the reason that they have to have their children vaccinated by forming false beliefs. And I think that such an example kind of demonstrates that often misinformation can actually make people less autonomous, can prevent them from actually doing what they want to do, in this case, protecting the health of their children. And I think that on that basis, we have reasons to consider that we should at least regulate misinformation online.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think one concept I like also in your research is this idea of like epistemic dependence, the fact that if we depend too much on, for example, social media platforms to give us the information we need to achieve our goals, and we're in this relationship of epistemic dependence in order to be able to make choices of our own. And that's clearly perhaps a powerful relationship that requires some regulation. Right. So time is running, and I want to open the floor to questions of the public. And so please, the audience, if you have any questions, now is the time to post them through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And you can also upvote the questions. So if there are questions that others have posted that you agree are important, you can upvote them. And so while people are doing this, I want to launch our second and last poll for today. And so just as a general question after the discussion that we've had with our panelists, are you personally optimistic or pessimistic about the impact of artificial intelligence on our democracies? So I think you can see the poll now and register your answers while we're waiting for some of the questions to ask our panelists. Okay, so I think now we can probably see the results of the poll. So 63% of you are pessimistic. I also a bit surprised by this. Only 37% are optimistic about the impact of artificial intelligence on our democracies. Personally, I think I feel relatively optimistic about the benefits of AI, but I do think that it's important to keep an eye on the potential risks and the potential disruptive effects that it can have. And I think that regulation is important to keep the benefits while avoiding some of the risks. So we've received a few questions from the audience. And so I'll start with the one that has been the most upvoted by the audience. So a question by Matt Pountney from London, who recently graduated from Cambridge. And so his question is the following: representative democracy was created to delegate decisions making in a pre-digital society, where it was not practical for large societies to vote directly on issues. So how should we justify representative democracy in a society in which technology now would allow us to vote directly on issues? So maybe if some of you want to take up this question.
I can start if you want.
Yeah, go on, Jocelyn.
All right. Yeah, no, I think that we saw today, I think, what are the different kind of problems and dilemmas created by the use of AI in different contexts. And there are no easy solutions, right, to the problem of regulating fake news or how to make AI algorithms more fair or hard to solve the explainability problems. There's no easy technological fixes, and our social answers also still need to be crafted. Right? So I'm rather pessimistic. I share the view of the majority on the impact of AI on democracy. I'm not hopeless. I think that we still need to work hard on it, and I'm quite encouraged by the quality of the discussion today, because sometimes AI ethics is a bit disappointing to say the least, but at least there are philosophers and political theorists working, building on their areas of expertise and tackling these challenges created by AI, and I think that's the best way to go. But that said, we know that given what Etienne said, it's not, we see the effect of the public discussion which have moved online. We know how difficult it is to have enlightened discussions online, and civic participation for many citizens predominantly goes through the social platforms and networks now, and clearly we still need institutions where at least good policy solutions can be recommended to our elected officials, and sometimes it will be during a public hearing or in other the different areas of expertise. And I'm not sure. I don't think that just asking people what they think online will suffice. We need strong deliberation prior to a decision, and we want people who are accountable to the public to make the decisions also. So at least from my perspective, we more than ever need these different locus of expertise, not to replace elected officials, but to make sure that that the public deliberation is rigorous and enlightened before we make actual decisions. So I think that there's still a role for our the processes of electoral and representative democracy.
Thank you. I'll try to take as many questions as possible, so I'll switch directly to the next one. So I've just seen that clearly the most voted question now asks Annette to go back to your example of algorithmic injustice. And so if you can say a little bit more on your approach of procedural fairness and why do you think that in designing AI systems, we need to take into account the structural injustices in the societies we live in?
Right. Yeah. I hope I don't get kicked out again. Apologies in advance if so. So the case that I mentioned before is really interesting because the Stanford researcher team said, hey, listen, we have this incredibly accurate tool now that can predict all of these behaviors and characteristics. So things like sexual orientation and propensity for violent criminality. And so the concerning thing here is actually not this question of whether the tool is accurate. Right. So the researchers approached this design question with an accuracy mindset. And to them, that accuracy question answered all other ethical and political concerns we might have here. But unfortunately, things aren't that simple because we have this historical baggage of making inferences based on blunt facial measurements and making these really far-reaching claims about, the way your face looks might really tell us something about how violent you might be. We have a word for that. That's phrenology and physiognomy, right? A racist pseudoscience that was propagated by eugenicists throughout history. So I think the really important question for us in liberal democratic societies is, why do we want to replicate this particular mode of inference? So could there be an important moral and political cost to making inferential judgments based on very similar types of data and towards very particular types of decision outputs? So there could be what philosophers call an expressivist cost here, right? So we might be communicating a very demeaning message in society if we're saying, hey, actually, we don't have so many worries about replicating this very similar inferential method that is eerily close to these historical examples that have now been debunked as pseudoscience and have clearly been very harmful. So there we might get an exacerbation effect, right? So we might actually further entrench injustice, even though we could assume that the Stanford team is right, that their tool is for some reason really accurate, right? So the accuracy question doesn't really help us solve the structural injustice question to its fullest extent. So that's why it's really important to have this process of human critique and deliberation about the kinds of goals that we're really trying to solve when we use AI in some domain. So rather than just asking, can my tool predict that somebody's gay or that somebody's likely to commit violent crimes, we should instead ask, well, why do we want AI to solve this task for us, right? Like, are there other tasks that are more important and more insightful? And why do we need to use sophisticated forms of automation to perform this task? So switching the question more from accuracy as such and towards goals and purposes and how those goals and purposes actually align with democratic equality as an ideal, that would be really important in our quest to actually move closer to structural justice rather than further away from it.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. And again, very illuminating examples. Time is running, but I want to ask another question, which I found quite good, because now we focused on kind of the risks and the dangers of the development of artificial intelligence for our democracies. But if we want to kind of promote a bit more optimism in favor of technology, do you think that there are ways in which it's possible to use AI or to deploy AI to make elections more accurate or more fair, right? So are there ways to use technology in a positive way to improve elections, democratic elections? Do you have any ideas on this question?
I can jump in, Thomas. I don't know if it's exactly about elections, but one thing that I found very interesting, and I wish we had more time to discuss with the panelists, is that I really agree with the kind of risk that come with using AI to start to ask AI to perform tasks that were traditionally performed by humans. One sector in which I think it's going to be very difficult to avoid using or relying on AI is content moderation. So if you take content moderation seriously, the amount of information that is exchanged on social media, the sheer magnitude of it, makes it so that it's going to be very difficult to have all of this information only reviewed by humans, right? And I don't really see a future in which we can effectively moderate content without relying on artificial intelligence, right? That's kind of an indirect answer to the question. The question's about election, but I think the kind of information that people are exposed with has a decisive impact on how they're going to vote. And I think that if we use AI for content moderation, maybe that. I just want to underline by saying, I don't think that, again, AI is a miracle cure for content moderation. I think that there's a serious lack of human expertise in Silicon Valley, especially in engaging with political content in other languages than English. Sometimes a call to violence in a different dialect or different language is very hard to detect by someone that's not familiar with this context. So I really, really hope that in the future years, we're going to see more people from all around the world speaking a lot of different languages, familiar with a lot of very different political contexts, actually start working for companies. And I want to underline this also. We're all thinking about artificial intelligence. We should not underestimate the kind of power that humans who work for tech companies in Silicon Valley have, right? The people who draft policy about misinformation and hate speech are not machines, they are humans, right? And they do things, they ask themselves questions that are very similar to the questions that philosophers ask themselves. What counts as harm? Right? When there's a certain kind of content that threatens democracy or democratic integrity, is it sufficient reasons for us to remove it, or should we flag it? All of those questions are being asked by humans and discussed by humans. And I think that one big problem in Silicon Valley is that there's not a lot of dialogue between people like us, philosophers, members of the audience interested in the ethics of AI, and the people who are asked to draft those policies. So I really think that we need to find a way to kind of get a dialogue going and really sit at the table with the people who are drafting policy, because drafting those policies is really going to have an impact. Kind of people are shaping our digital futures. And I think that the way it's done is not sufficiently inclusive. So I really hope that the discussion will become more inclusive in the future.
Yeah, very interesting. And I see that we have exhausted our time. So thank you all for joining us today. And join me in thanking our panelists, Jocelyn Maclure, Zeynep Pamuk, Annette Zimmermann, and Etienne Brown. Really, this was a fascinating discussion. And if you've enjoyed this discussion and want to learn more about the ethics of artificial intelligence, I know there was a question in the chat about the papers I mentioned during the event. They're all on the page of the event on the LSE website. And I also invite you to follow the LSE Masterclass in Ethics of AI, and you will find a link to this page on the page of the event. You'll also find a schedule for future LSE events. So that's our time, and I wish everyone a good day or a good night wherever you are.